The doctors had already given up. Machines beeped like a countdown, and the billionaire father stood frozen as his son lay motionless, with only 1 day left to live. Nurses whispered, death papers were ready, and then the impossible happened. A poor, barefoot girl broke through security, uncorked a cracked glass bottle, and splashed a strange liquid onto the dying boy's chest. The heart monitor flatlined. People screamed. The father collapsed. And just when everyone thought she had killed him, the machine let out a single terrifying beep that changed everything. Before we dive deeper into this shocking and emotional story, I want to connect with you first. I'm curious, which city are you watching this video from? Drop your city's name in the comments. I read every single one and love seeing where all of you are from. And if you enjoy stories full of twists, suspense, heartbreak, and powerful life lessons that stay with you long after watching, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. Today's story isn't just about a miracle, it's about choices, courage, and how a single moment can change everything. So, buckle up because this story will take you straight to the edge of your seat. Adrian Cross was a man whose very name carried power, influence, and fear. To the outside world, he was untouchable, a billionaire with skyscrapers that pierced the clouds, private jets that could take him anywhere in the world at a moment's notice, and a network of politicians and businessmen who answered his every command. Yet despite all the wealth and authority he commanded, Adrian had never known true peace. Not because of enemies, lawsuits, or competition. Those were trivial in his world, but because of an emptiness he could not fill, an invisible void that had been growing for years. And that void, unknown to almost everyone, was tied to his son Ethan. Ethan Cross was only 17, but he carried a quiet strength that belied his age. Unlike his father, who thrived in chaos and control, Ethan had always been calm, introspective, and gentle. He spent hours reading in his room, sketching in notebooks, and observing the world with an intelligence that often startled those around him. While other children of the wealthy flaunted their extravagance, throwing parties or racing luxury cars, Ethan had always remained quietly in the background, almost invisible in the shadow of his father's immense presence. Adrian, in his relentless pursuit of power and wealth, had never truly understood the boy, or perhaps he had understood but chose to ignore him, believing that love could be replaced with material comforts. But tonight, in the sterile, white-lit ICU of St. Jude's Hospital, all of that irrelevance and neglect crystallized into a single terrifying truth. His son was dying and nothing, no amount of money or influence, could change it. The doctors had been frank. Adrian, who was used to hearing "we can fix that," or "consider it done," in almost every aspect of life, now faced the one sentence he could not control: brain failure. Blood poisoning. He has less than 24 hours, maybe less. The words hit him like a physical blow, echoing in the empty corridors of the hospital. Adrian had summoned the world's best doctors, Germany, Japan, Switzerland, but the outcome was always the same. No one could stop what was happening. Ethan's condition was critical, and the timeline was unforgiving. Adrian's life of certainty, of calculated control, had collapsed into chaos, leaving him exposed and powerless in a way he had never experienced. The hospital was eerily quiet that night, except for the rhythmic, shallow beeping of machines monitoring Ethan's fragile body. Nurses hovered at the edges of the room, whispering updates to each other, but Adrian heard nothing. He could only watch as his son lay there, pale and still, his chest rising and falling with shallow, labored breaths. Adrian had never been alone with the truth of mortality before, not really, but now, in this fluorescent room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear, he confronted it directly. He was about to lose the one person who, despite all his mistakes as a father, had remained his child, loyal and silent, untouched by the corruption and ambition that had defined the Cross family legacy. Adrian thought back to the moments he had missed, the birthdays he had ignored, the games he had skipped, the simple words of encouragement he had never given. Ethan had grown up in silence, never demanding attention, never complaining about the life of isolation his father had chosen for him. Adrian realized with painful clarity that all the wealth in the world could not replace those lost moments, that money could not buy back the time they had never shared. And now, in a cruel twist of fate, the universe had delivered a lesson in the harshest way possible. The son he had taken for granted was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Outside the ICU, the hospital had descended into a frenzy. Reporters gathered, cameras flashed, and social media lit up with the news: "Billionaire's son has only 1 day left to live." Headlines screamed across every platform and millions watched in disbelief. But for Adrian, the world outside might as well have been another universe. He could hear it all, but it was distant and irrelevant compared to the battle unfolding in front of him. Every second felt stretched, a painful eternity marked by the beeping machines and the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. And then there was Lena. She appeared almost out of nowhere, a small, barefoot girl standing in the shadows, watching through the glass doors of the ICU. She was nothing like the people Adrian was used to seeing. No designer dress, no expensive handbag, no air of entitlement. Just a thin, frail figure, eyes filled with a strange combination of determination and certainty that unsettled him. Adrian barely noticed her at first, lost in his own panic and despair. But there was something in the girl's presence that he couldn't ignore, a kind of quiet defiance that demanded attention even amidst the chaos. Ethan's breathing became more irregular. Nurses rushed to adjust his monitoring his vital signs with urgent whispers. Adrian's hands shook, gripping the sides of the bed as if sheer force could pull his son back from the edge. Doctors moved swiftly, but even their experience and expertise seemed powerless against the relentless progression of his illness. Adrian realized he was witnessing something beyond medicine, beyond human control. He had built empires, controlled markets, and manipulated governments, but none of that mattered now. Here in this room the rules were different. Life and death were no longer negotiable, and Adrian was powerless to intervene. In that moment, Adrian caught sight of Ethan's hand twitch slightly, a faint but unmistakable movement. It was so small that it could have been imagined, yet it was enough to ignite a spark of hope and fear. Hope that maybe, just maybe, his son could survive this impossible situation. Fear that even this small sign could vanish in an instant, leaving only the unbearable reality of loss. Adrian felt a crushing weight in his chest, a mixture of regret, desperation, and an unfamiliar humility. He understood, perhaps for the first time in his life, what it meant to truly fear for someone else. The father-son relationship that had always been distant and strained now became painfully real. Adrian wanted to speak, to apologize, to tell Ethan everything he had never said, but words felt meaningless. All the money, all the power, all the influence in the world could not bring back the lost time or repair the quiet neglect that had defined their relationship. Adrian realized that he had been given a final, merciless test, to confront his failures, to watch his child teeter on the edge of life and death, and to hope that some miracle could intervene before it was too late. As the night deepened, the hospital hallways seemed to shrink, enclosing Adrian and Ethan in a small, tense bubble of anticipation and dread. Nurses checked monitors, doctors conferred in hushed tones, and the steady beeping of machines marked time with cruel precision. Adrian remained at the bedside, unblinking, as if by sheer will he could keep Ethan tethered to life. But deep down, he knew that human will alone could not alter the course that fate had drawn. And then, through the quiet tension, Adrian noticed Lena again. She had moved closer, somehow slipping past the security measures he had relied upon. Her eyes were locked on Ethan, her expression calm, almost reverent. Adrian's instinct was to order her removed, to assert control as he always had, but something in the girl's gaze froze him. It was as though she carried a secret, a knowledge that neither he nor the doctors possessed. Her presence was a puzzle he could not yet solve, a variable in a situation that had already spiraled beyond his control. In that sterile, white room, surrounded by the hum of machines and the low murmur of hospital staff, Adrian realized that the story of his son's life and death was no longer his to command. The empire, the wealth, the legacy, none of it mattered in the face of the fragile, wavering life before him. Ethan's existence had become a mirror, reflecting all of Adrian's failures, regrets, and lost opportunities. And in the shadow of that mirror stood Lena, a quiet reminder that sometimes, intervention comes from the most unexpected places, and that hope, however unlikely, can emerge in the most desperate of circumstances. Adrian gripped the edge of the bed, his knuckles white, his body trembling, and for the first time he allowed himself to feel powerless. The billionaire, the man who had conquered the world in every conceivable way, was now forced to witness a reality he could not control. The life of his son, his only child, balanced precariously on the edge, and all the strategies, negotiations, and wealth he had amassed meant nothing in the face of this final, unyielding truth. Every second that passed was a reminder that life was fragile, fleeting, and irretrievably precious. Adrian's eyes never left Ethan, watching for the faintest sign of breath, the tiniest flicker of consciousness. He whispered words he had never spoken before, apologies and promises, though he knew they could not undo years of absence and neglect. And as the night stretched on, the air thick with tension, Adrian understood something that no amount of money or power could teach. True influence is not in wealth, but in love, presence, and the courage to act when it matters most. Outside, the city continued unaware. The headlines screamed tragedy, speculation ran rampant, and millions watched live updates, fascinated by the spectacle of a billionaire's private crisis. But inside the ICU, time had slowed to a heartbeat, and Adrian Cross faced a reality that stripped away all pretense. His son's life hung by a thread, and a poor girl standing silently in the corner had just become the most significant figure in a story that no amount of money could dictate. The world had no control here. Only chance, choice, and the fragile thread of fate governed what was about to unfold. In that room, with the beeping machines, the sterile smell, and the unbearable quiet, Adrian Cross, the master of empires, the conqueror of markets, the man who had everything, found himself utterly powerless, waiting, hoping, and fearing for the life of the boy who had never demanded attention but had always deserved it. And it was in that precise, unbearable moment that the story took its first turn toward the miraculous, toward the impossible, and toward the shocking twist that would challenge everything Adrian thought he knew about life, death, and the nature of true courage. Lena was a girl the world had long forgotten, a whisper in the chaos of a city that thrived on wealth, power, and appearances. Her life had never been easy, nor had it ever promised to be. Born in the crowded, dilapidated slums on the outskirts of the city, she had known struggle from her very first breath. Her parents had died when she was barely 10, victims of a system that overlooked the poor and punished the vulnerable. Since then, Lena had lived alone, navigating the twisted alleys and dangerous streets with a courage and resilience most adults could not fathom. She scavenged for food, worked odd jobs, and endured the cruelty of a world that seemed determined to keep her invisible. Yet, despite the hardship, Lena possessed a strength that set her apart, a quiet determination, a sharp intelligence, and an unshakable sense of purpose that had been forged in the fires of survival. From a distance, she appeared fragile, almost delicate. Her frame was small, her clothes worn and patched, and her feet calloused from years of walking barefoot over concrete and rubble. But her eyes, large, dark, and impossibly bright, told a different story. They were the eyes of someone who had seen death, suffering, and injustice, yet refused to be defeated. Those eyes were always watching, always analyzing, always learning. Lena had a way of noticing things others overlooked. The way a flower could grow through a crack in the pavement, the subtle gestures of kindness from strangers, and the small miracles that often went unnoticed by a society obsessed with wealth and status. In a world that ignored her, she had become a keen observer of life, attuned to its hidden rhythms and secret possibilities. What set Lena apart, however, was not just her survival skills or her perceptiveness, it was the strange, ancient bottle she carried everywhere she went. The bottle was small, made of thick, slightly yellowed glass, with cracks running along its surface like veins. It had no label, no markings, no indication of its contents. People who had glimpsed it whispered rumors, calling it magical or cursed, though Lena never confirmed or denied anything. "It's just water," she would say with a faint smile, but there was a knowing glimmer in her eyes that suggested otherwise. The truth was that the bottle held a secret, a gift from a father she had never fully known, a man whose brilliance had been stolen by greed and politics, leaving Lena with only this final fragment of his genius. The liquid inside was not ordinary, it was a formula, a miraculous creation designed to heal, to restore, and in ways that bordered on the impossible, to give life when all hope seemed lost. Lena herself had only recently understood its power, and she had spent nights in whispered dreams preparing for the moment she might need it most. That moment came unexpectedly. News had reached her that the son of billionaire Adrian Cross was dying. Ethan Cross, the boy who had lived a life of privilege but emotional neglect, was on the brink of death, with doctors predicting he had no more than a single day left to live. For Lena, it was a jolt, a strange pull at her heart she could not explain. She had never met Ethan, had never seen him in person, yet something in her spirit recognized the urgency, the fragility of life, and the opportunity to intervene where fate seemed determined to claim another victim. Lena's heart pounded as she listened to the updates on the radio in her tiny room, a cramped space barely larger than a closet, lit by a single flickering bulb. She could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on her, an invisible force compelling her to act. 3 nights before, Lena had dreamt of her father, an image she had not seen in years. In the dream, he appeared not as the strict, absent parent of memory, but as a kindly, urgent figure, his eyes filled with both sorrow and purpose. "The time has come," he whispered, his voice echoing like a distant bell. "If you hesitate, everything is lost." She woke with a start, the bottle clutched tightly in her hand, feeling the cold glass against her palm. She had understood then that this was not merely about survival, not about herself, not even about wealth. It was about choice, about courage, about stepping into a moment where the stakes were unimaginably high and the outcome uncertain. Lena had always known that life required bravery, but never had it demanded such a direct confrontation with destiny. As Lena made her way toward the hospital, navigating the chaotic streets of the city, she felt a strange calm settle over her. The world around her was alive with noise, yet she moved through it as if in a bubble, her focus entirely on the goal ahead. People jostled past her, indifferent, unaware of the gravity of what she carried, and yet she noticed everything: the way a dog shivered in an alley, the glance of a tired mother carrying a child, the glint of moonlight reflecting off broken glass. Every detail grounded her, reminded her of the fragility of existence, and reinforced the necessity of what she was about to attempt. Her journey through the city felt both perilous and ordained, a test of her determination and the purity of her intentions. By the time she arrived at St. Jude's Hospital, the night had grown deep and heavy, the air thick with the scent of rain and the distant hum of traffic. The hospital stood like a fortress, its glass doors reflecting the sterile lights of the emergency wing. Security was tight, the corridors were patrolled, and only authorized personnel were allowed beyond certain points. Lena, however, did not falter. She moved with a stealth born of desperation and purpose, slipping past guards with the ease of someone who had learned to navigate danger all her life. Every step was measured, every breath controlled as she approached the ICU where Ethan lay fighting for his life. Her hands did not tremble, her resolve unshaken, though she was acutely aware of the consequences if she were caught or stopped. Inside the ICU, the scene was one of tension and despair. Nurses hovered at Ethan's bedside, adjusting 4 lines, monitoring his vitals, and whispering updates that seemed increasingly grim. Adrian Cross stood rigidly nearby, his expression a mask of composure that barely concealed the terror underneath. He was a man accustomed to control, yet here he was, utterly powerless, confronted with the possibility of losing the one person who mattered most to him. Lena's presence went unnoticed at first, a small shadow in the corner of the room. But she did not flinch. Her eyes were fixed on Ethan, and in that gaze was an intensity that carried with it the weight of her entire life, her knowledge of the bottle's potential, and the unshakable belief that she could make a difference. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times. She had imagined the guards rushing at her, the doctors screaming, the father's disbelief, and the miracle she hoped would unfold. And now, as she watched Ethan lying pale and lifeless, a sense of clarity washed over her. It was not arrogance that propelled her forward, but a profound sense of moral responsibility. Life had placed her in this position, and she would not turn away. She knew the risk. If the liquid did not work, if she failed, she would be blamed, arrested, or worse. But she also knew that hesitation would guarantee the loss of a life that could still be saved. In that moment, Lena understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. And so, she stepped closer, the bottle clutched tightly in her hands, her eyes locked on Ethan. Adrian noticed her then, finally realizing that a stranger, a girl he would never have expected to play a role in his son's life, had entered the room. Panic flared in his chest. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the sterile hum of the ICU. Nurses turned, alarmed, and one of them reached for the emergency call button. But Lena did not hesitate. She did not speak. She did not explain. She only moved with deliberate precision toward the boy on the bed, knowing that this was the culmination of her preparation, her instinct, and the secret knowledge she carried. In that instant, time seemed to slow. Adrian's voice rose, the nurse's whispers became frantic, and the machines monitored Ethan's fragile heartbeat with an ominous, unchanging rhythm. Lena raised the bottle, her hands steady despite the chaos surrounding her. Every fiber of her being was focused on a single goal: to save this boy's life, to honor the promise of her father's final gift, and to confront the merciless uncertainty of fate itself. She was acutely aware that the next few seconds would determine everything: success or failure, life or death, hope or despair. And with a deep breath that carried all the weight of her past, all her pain, and all her courage, Lena prepared to act. For Lena, the world outside no longer existed. The city, the slums, the endless nights of struggle, all of it had led to this singular moment. And though she was small, barefoot, and unknown, she carried within her the power to change the course of a life, a family, and perhaps even the destiny of a man who had everything yet understood so little about what truly mattered. In that moment, Lena was no longer invisible. She was no longer a girl the world ignored. She was the fulcrum upon which the scales of life and death teetered, and everything depended on her courage, her knowledge, and the mysterious, powerful liquid she held in her hands. The moment arrived like a storm breaking, sudden and undeniable. Lena had slipped past the guards, past the blinking cameras and the frantic nurses, moving with a determination that defied her size, her youth, and the fear that would have frozen anyone else in place. Adrian Cross finally noticed her standing near the bedside, a strange, small figure clutching a cracked glass bottle with a quiet intensity that made his chest tighten. "Get her out," he shouted, his voice booming through the sterile ICU corridor. Nurses froze, machines beeped in nervous rhythm, and doctors turned to assess the sudden commotion. Yet Lena did not flinch. She did not even glance at the man whose power could have crushed her in an instant. Her eyes were fixed entirely on Ethan, on the fragile line of life that still lingered against impossible odds. The room became a chaos of conflicting energies. Adrian lunged forward, his face twisted in disbelief and anger. "Stop. You don't know what you're doing," he roared, the words catching in the throat of the nurse who was already reaching for a call button. But Lena moved with calm precision, a quiet rhythm to her actions that seemed almost otherworldly. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, visualizing each step, each movement, each breath. Fear existed, yes, but it was transformed into focus, into purpose, into an almost sacred duty that transcended the panic erupting around her. She raised the bottle above Ethan's chest, the liquid shimmering under the harsh fluorescent lights, a golden promise of life that few could understand. Adrian's heart hammered against his ribcage. He had never felt this powerless. As a billionaire, he had commanded armies of people, manipulated governments, and shifted the fates of industries. Yet here he was, shouting, struggling, utterly helpless in the face of a barefoot girl and a simple glass bottle. He wanted to seize it, destroy it, or demand answers, but he could not stop what she was about to do. There was a strange inevitability to Lena's movements, as though the universe itself had aligned to allow this one small, improbable action to unfold. And Adrian realized with a growing dread that he was witnessing a miracle in slow motion, a defiance of reason and control that he could neither predict nor prevent. Lena took a deep breath, the world outside the ICU fading into irrelevance. She tilted the bottle, and the strange liquid began to flow, catching the light in molten threads as it fell onto Ethan's motionless chest. The world seemed to pause, the machines, the monitors, even the staff holding their collective breath. The liquid made contact, and for a moment nothing happened. Silence reigned, thick and suffocating. Adrian's hands shook as he reached toward her, but she pulled back instinctively, unwilling to risk interruption. The room held its collective tension as if the universe itself were waiting to exhale. Then, as if responding to some ancient, hidden command, the heart monitor flatlined. A long, ominous beep echoed through the room. Nurses gasped. Doctors froze. Adrian's face drained of color. "Stop her. She's killed him," one doctor shouted, rushing forward with panic in every step. Adrian lunged toward Lena, rage and fear mixing in a storm inside him. The guards finally moved, attempting to restrain her, but she was already moving with an agility born of desperation. The bottle was in her hands, the liquid shimmering like liquid sunlight, and she knew that the moments to follow were the thin line between life and death. Adrian's voice rose again, commanding, pleading, furious, but Lena did not look at him. Her focus remained entirely on Ethan, on the boy who had been given no choice, no warning, no voice in the matter of his own life. Then, something miraculous began to unfold. At first, it was subtle, so subtle that many in the room almost missed it. Ethan's chest twitched, the shallow rise and fall of his lungs imperceptible at first, then unmistakable. The flatline beep softened, slowed, and then impossibly began to spike upward. Nurses' eyes widened. The doctors froze mid-step, staring at the monitor in disbelief. Adrian's hand hovered in midair, powerless, as his son's heartbeat returned, slow but steady, a rhythm that defied explanation and logic. He could hardly breathe, the enormity of the moment pressing down on him, filling him with a mix of awe, fear, and relief that left him shaking and speechless. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, faint at first, but then more clearly with recognition and a glimmer of awareness. The room erupted with quiet gasps, the disbelief palpable in every corner. Nurses stepped back, some reaching instinctively to check the boy's vitals, while others stared, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Adrian could not speak, could not move, could not rationalize what had just occurred. His son, the boy he had feared was lost forever, was alive, and the reason was a poor girl he had ignored, underestimated, and almost dismissed. Every ounce of his pride, his control, his authority, felt simultaneously shattered and irrelevant in the face of the miracle he could neither explain nor claim. Lena stood still, her face calm but intense, her hands still clutching the empty bottle. There was no triumph in her expression, no boastful victory. She had done what needed to be done, nothing more. And yet the magnitude of what she had accomplished hung in the air like an unspoken force, a truth too profound for words. She had defied expectation, defied power, and defied the very logic of life itself. Adrian, the man accustomed to commanding worlds, found himself bowing, silently, to the courage and knowledge of someone he would have otherwise dismissed. The room was electric with tension, disbelief, and a strange reverence. Nurses whispered, doctors exchanged stunned glances, and Adrian remained rooted to the spot, unable to process the enormity of what had just transpired. For Ethan, awakening to consciousness was like surfacing from a deep, endless void. He blinked slowly, trying to comprehend where he was, who was there, and why he felt warmth returning to his body. The first word he spoke, weak but determined, was not to his father, but in recognition of the girl who had saved him. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Lena's response was calm, simple, and measured. "I am just someone who had to help." Adrian's mind raced. He wanted to scream, to demand explanations, to assert control, but there were no words sufficient to match the moment. He had been stripped of authority, humiliated in the most private of arenas, and forced to witness a miracle he could neither predict nor orchestrate. He realized with a sudden and shocking clarity that the universe had chosen Lena as the agent of fate, as the deliverer of life, and that all his wealth, influence, and power were meaningless against the raw, decisive force of courage and purpose. The media, watching from outside, had not yet grasped what had occurred. The initial reports were chaotic: billionaire son in critical condition, hospital drama unfolds, miracle or mystery? But inside the room reality had shifted. Ethan was alive. Lena had acted. Adrian's worldview, once solid and unyielding, had fractured in a single heart-stopping instant. He could no longer rely on money, influence, or manipulation to shape outcomes. Life, as he now realized, operated on a plane far more unpredictable, far more profound, and far more human than anything he had ever encountered. As the adrenaline of the moment began to settle, Adrian approached Lena, his expression a mixture of gratitude, fear, and awe. He wanted to speak, to thank, to demand answers, but he struggled to form coherent words. The room, still buzzing with the quiet shock of the medical staff, seemed suspended in time. Every gaze lingered on Lena, the small girl whose actions had upended the certainty of a billionaire's world. She, who had been overlooked, ignored, and underestimated, now commanded attention through sheer courage and decisive action. In the silence that followed, Ethan's breathing stabilized, the monitors beeping steadily, life restored where there had been only imminent death moments before. The ICU staff, once frantic and panicked, now moved cautiously, almost reverently, as if stepping lightly so as not to disturb the fragile miracle that had unfolded. Adrian finally found his voice, broken and halting, and spoke to Lena with a gravity that carried the weight of every mistake he had ever made. You saved him. How did you do this?" Lena's answer was simple, understated, and profound. "I did what had to be done. That's all." The moment lingered, heavy with implications. No one could explain what had happened scientifically, medically, or logically. The liquid, the courage, the timing, all of it defied explanation. Yet the evidence was undeniable. A life had been restored, a family shaken to its core had been changed forever, and a single act of bravery had rewritten what everyone thought was impossible. Adrian, for the first time in his life, realized that true power was not measured in wealth, authority, or influence, but in courage, compassion, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. Lena, quiet and resolute, stepped back into the shadows of the ICU, her role complete. The world had taken notice now, but she did not seek fame or recognition. For her, the act itself was enough. A fulfillment of a duty, a response to a call she could not ignore, a tangible proof that even the smallest, most overlooked person could change the course of fate in a single, decisive moment. The room had finally quieted, but the tension remained, lingering in every corner like a heavy fog. Ethan's chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of returning life, his eyes blinking open as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. Adrian Cross, a man accustomed to commanding armies, negotiating billion-dollar deals, and controlling the destinies of entire companies, now stood powerless, unable to fully grasp the miraculous turn of events. His son, the boy whose life had been deemed over in less than a day, was alive. Yet the answers Adrian desperately sought were nowhere to be found. All eyes turned to Lena, the barefoot girl whose small, quiet presence had just altered fate itself. The liquid, the substance that had brought Ethan back from the brink, remained the single unspoken enigma in the room. Doctors and scientists, despite their advanced knowledge, had no idea what it was, how it worked, or why it had succeeded when conventional medicine had failed. Tests revealed no recognizable chemical compounds, no traceable elements, nothing that could explain the miraculous revival. Adrian, consumed by a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a simmering desire to control the unknown, demanded answers. "What is this?" he asked, his voice shaking, his powerless frustration palpable. "What have you done to my son?" Lena's eyes met his, calm and unwavering, and for a moment, the billionaire realized that he was standing not before a child, but before a force of nature, one he could neither dominate nor intimidate. Lena's story began long before this moment. She was not merely a street-smart girl from the slums. Her father, a brilliant scientist whose research had been suppressed and stolen by powerful institutions, had discovered a formula capable of regenerating human cells at an unprecedented rate. It was a liquid unlike any other, designed to awaken dormant regenerative capabilities, heal internal decay, and in extreme cases, bring the body back from the brink of death. Her father had been murdered, a victim of greed and envy, leaving Lena with nothing but the bottle and the knowledge of how to use it. For years she had studied it, learned its properties, and waited for the moment when she might have to act. She understood that the liquid's power came with limitations. It could only work under precise conditions, required the recipient's body to accept it willingly, and would fail if met with resistance, fear, or interference. Most importantly, it was a one-time chance. The formula was finite, irreplaceable, and once used could never be recreated. The night she arrived at the hospital, Lena had known she was walking into a confrontation with forces far greater than herself. Security, doctors, Adrian's overwhelming presence. All of it was daunting, but her purpose was clear. She had not acted impulsively or recklessly. She had calculated every possibility, every risk, and every outcome. Her heart had been pounding, yes, but it had been matched by an unshakable conviction. Ethan's life could be saved if she did exactly what needed to be done. As she uncorked the bottle and poured the shimmering liquid onto his chest, she channeled all of her knowledge, all of her courage, and all of the years of preparation into that single act. The success of the moment was not luck. It was precision, skill, and destiny intertwined. Adrian, still trying to process the miracle, could not accept it as mere chance. He had built his life on rationality, calculation, and control. The idea that an unremarkable girl from the slums could wield such power defied everything he believed about the world. His mind raced, imagining the potential implications. If the liquid could bring life where there was none, if it could bypass medical science entirely, then the power contained in Lena's hands was limitless. He wanted it, coveted it, and felt a dark spark of greed ignite within him. Yet as he looked at her, he noticed her calm demeanor, the quiet authority she exuded, and he realized that she could not be coerced, bought, or intimidated. The formula was as much a part of her as her heartbeat. It could not be separated from the courage and conviction that gave it life. The doctors, meanwhile, were scrambling to make sense of what had just occurred. Medical ethics, biological principles, and the laws of chemistry all seemed to have been violated in a single, breathtaking instant. One of the lead physicians approached cautiously, clipboard in hand, trying to maintain professional composure. This shouldn't be possible," he murmured. "There's no precedent for anything like this." His colleagues nodded, exchanging bewildered glances, aware that what they had witnessed defied decades of medical training. The hospital administrator, meanwhile, was on the phone with authorities and legal teams, recognizing that this was not merely a medical incident but a global phenomenon waiting to be discovered, analyzed, and perhaps exploited. But Lena remained calm. She did not speak unless spoken to, did not move unless necessary, and did not allow herself to be distracted by the chaos around her. She understood the stakes. If the wrong person learned the secret of the liquid, if it fell into the hands of those motivated by greed, it could be misused in unimaginable ways. The formula was not a toy, a tool, or a commodity. It was a responsibility, a legacy, and a burden. For Lena, the act of saving Ethan had been both a necessity and a moral imperative. She had stepped into the moment not for fame, recognition, or wealth, but because it was the right thing to do, and because she alone could act without hesitation or compromise. Adrian, however, was not easily deterred. His mind, trained to strategize, manipulate, and acquire, began plotting immediately. If he could control the secret, he could control life itself. He envisioned laboratories, guarded facilities, and experiments that could revolutionize medicine and extend life indefinitely. He imagined the headlines, the power, and the influence he could wield if he possessed the knowledge that Lena held. Yet as he looked at her steady gaze, he realized that she was not a negotiable entity. She had acted of her own volition, and she would not be swayed by threats, money, or authority. The power he coveted was inseparable from the girl herself, and any attempt to force her hand would be met with resistance as unyielding as the miracle she had just performed. Ethan, still weak and disoriented, began to ask questions, his voice trembling but curious. What is this? How am I alive? Lena approached cautiously, careful to maintain eye contact and gauge his comprehension. She explained in soft, deliberate words that he had been on the brink of death, that conventional medicine had failed, and that the liquid had activated his body's regenerative abilities. She did not go into specifics, did not reveal the scientific intricacies, but she conveyed enough to give Ethan a sense of understanding. He listened, wide-eyed and incredulous, realizing that his survival was not merely a stroke of luck but the result of deliberate, calculated action by someone he had never expected to encounter. As Adrian listened to Lena's explanation, a part of him was humbled, forced to confront the limitations of his power and the profound reality that life and death were not entirely within his control. Another part of him, however, burned with greed, ambition, and fear, the fear that such a secret, if left unclaimed, could alter the balance of power in ways he could not tolerate. He attempted to negotiate, to persuade, to coerce Lena into sharing the formula, but her responses were firm, unwavering, and morally resolute. She would not betray the trust of her father's legacy, nor would she allow herself to be manipulated by the very man whose neglect had nearly cost Ethan his life. The night wore on, and the hospital slowly returned to a semblance of order. Nurses monitored Ethan with renewed vigilance, doctors documented the incident as meticulously as possible, and Adrian remained at the bedside, torn between gratitude, fear, and a desperate desire to understand the forces he could not command. Lena, meanwhile, quietly slipped back into the shadows, her work complete, her role fulfilled, and her presence already beginning to fade from immediate notice. She had acted decisively, saved a life, and preserved a secret that could reshape humanity, yet she did not linger for recognition or applause. For her, the act itself and the moral imperative behind it was reward enough. Yet even as calm settled, the implications of what had occurred began to ripple outward. Questions loomed. How could a single liquid carried by a small girl defy the boundaries of science and medicine? What ethical dilemmas would arise if such power became widely known? Could humanity handle the responsibility of controlling life and death itself? And most importantly, what would Adrian do now, confronted with both his son's miraculous survival and the realization that he had no control over the girl who had made it possible? The secret of the liquid remained intact, its origins and function known only to Lena. Adrian's mind, though brilliant and calculating, could not reverse engineer what he had not observed being created. The formula's uniqueness lay not just in its chemical properties, but in the intent, focus, and precise conditions under which it had been administered. Without Lena, the secret was meaningless, a potential power that existed but could not be harnessed. Adrian was left to confront the humbling truth that not all power could be bought, bargained for, or seized. Some forces, he realized, existed beyond wealth, influence, and authority, governed instead by courage, morality, and the precise timing of destiny. Lena's presence had revealed a new reality, one that challenged every assumption Adrian had ever held about the world. She had demonstrated that the smallest, most overlooked individuals could wield power that dwarfed empires, and that true influence was measured not by wealth or control, but by the willingness to act when it mattered most. Her secret, her courage, and her knowledge had created a ripple that would alter the lives of everyone in that room forever, leaving Adrian, Ethan, and the entire hospital staff with a sense of awe, humility, and the sobering recognition of forces far greater than themselves. The following days were tense, fragile, and charged with a quiet storm that no one could openly acknowledge. Ethan had stabilized, his body recovering miraculously fast, his strength returning at a rate that baffled the doctors. Yet the miraculous recovery that had saved his life had also shattered the illusions of control, hierarchy, and entitlement that had governed Adrian's world. The billionaire's mind raced, constantly calculating, plotting, and strategizing. Lena's intervention had worked, yes, but she had acted independently, without permission, without consent, and without deference to the authority Adrian had always assumed was absolute. And in that fact lay a seed of anger, obsession, and a desire to reclaim power over a situation that had proven unmanageable. Adrian had spent his life used to getting what he wanted. People bowed, businesses folded to his demands, politicians answered his calls, but here was Lena, a barefoot girl with nothing but courage and knowledge, standing above his influence, unyielding and untouchable. The idea that someone so insignificant had wielded a power he could not comprehend was intolerable. The lines between gratitude and resentment blurred in his mind. He wanted to thank her, yes, but he also wanted control. He wanted her secret. He wanted to harness it. He wanted to ensure that no one, not even fate itself, could ever interfere with his family again. And it was in this obsession that the first cracks of betrayal began to form, invisible to all but him. Late one night, Adrian called Lena into his private study, a luxurious room filled with rare art, polished mahogany, and technology that cost more than most could imagine in a lifetime. His voice was calm, measured, and deceptively polite, a stark contrast to the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Lena," he began, "I want to understand what you did, how you did it, and how we can ensure it never fails again." His eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto hers. Lena remained still, composed, and wary. She had anticipated this conversation, the underlying motivations hidden behind the veneer of civility, and she was prepared for it. "It's not something that can be controlled," she said quietly, her tone firm but not confrontational. "It's not a tool, a commodity, or a weapon. It's a responsibility." Adrian smiled, but it was not a smile of warmth, it was the predatory grin of a man accustomed to bending others to his will. "Responsibility," he said slowly, savoring the word, "is something we can teach, something we can oversee, something we can manage." He reached for the bottle, the empty glass glinting under the chandelier lights. Lena instinctively stepped back. "You don't understand," she said. "It's not just the liquid. It's the timing, the focus, the intent. It's not yours to take." But Adrian had already decided that boundaries were for others to respect, not for him to honor. The thought that his son's life, and possibly the lives of countless others, might one day depend on Lena's mercy drove him to consider actions he had never imagined. He devised a plan, subtle yet ruthless, designed to manipulate, coerce, and ultimately betray the girl who had just saved his son. He would offer her security, shelter, and wealth, things Lena had never known, but each gesture would carry the silent demand of submission, the hidden requirement of compliance. He framed it as protection, but in reality it was control. Life is fragile, unpredictable, and full of moments that can change everything in an instant. The true power lies not in wealth, influence, or status, but in courage, integrity, and the willingness to act when it matters most. Lena's story reminds us that even the smallest, most overlooked person can create miracles that transform lives, challenge the powerful, and leave an indelible mark on the world. So, as you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what choice will you make when faced with a moment that demands courage? Will you act or will you wait? If this story moved you, inspired you, or gave you a new perspective on life, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel to witness more unbelievable stories that will shock, inspire, and stay with you forever.